Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Silent Hill. In the last part we finished off our duties in the school and now we've reached Alchemilla Hospital. Oh dear, that was a gunshot. Let's check on that before things can potentially go even more downhill they already have in this town.
Hold it! Stop! Don't shoot! Wait! I'm not here to fight. My name is Harry Mason. I'm in town on vacation.
Thank God, another human being.
Do you work here?
I'm Dr. Michael Kaufman. I work at this hospital.
So maybe you can tell me what's going on.
I really can't say. I was taking a nap in the staff room. When I woke up, it was like this. Everyone seems to have disappeared. And it's snowing out, this time of year. Something's gone seriously wrong. Did you see those monsters? Have you ever seen such aberrations? Ever even heard of such things? You and I both know creatures like that don't exist.
Yeah. Have you seen a little girl anywhere? I'm looking for my daughter. She's only 7, short, black hair.
She's missing. I'm sorry. But with all those monsters around, I highly doubt that she's... Sorry, I didn't mean to alarm you. Your wife, she's here with you?
She died 4 years ago. Now it's just me and my daughter.
I see. I'm sorry. Well, I'd better be going. I can't just sit around here doing nothing.
So long. Good luck out there.
Kaufman's interesting to me in that he's one of the few voice actors from the game who's done a lot of other stuff. He was quite a couple of characters, and I think one of the special editions of Monkey Island 1 and Monkey Island 2. By and large, most of the voice cast in this game was only really their respective character in this game. Hare is the only other standout with that, because he's also I think it's the librarian and Dracula in Symphony of the Night. And I'm meaning like the original Symphony of the Night dub, so this is the "What is a man" guy. And now we have the map for the hospital. This place has just about as many rooms as this school, but they're a lot easier to access because there's a central stairway that goes to all 3 floors, and an elevator. With that said, we are technically coming up on the first optional item to grab when it comes to getting the best ending. You don't need this to beat the game at all, but we're going to be grabbing it all the same. There's a newspaper. This article's been clipped out. And I believe the article that was clipped out there is cut out of the game entirely. You were meant to find it in the final area, and we'll talk about it then. But that's just, like, completely removed from the main game, obtainably. There's implications it could also be a different article, but we'll talk more about that later on. Also over here is a secondary map, the hospital basement, because I guess that's only for staff. First thing we want to do, though, we want to come to this conference room right off to the side and grab ourselves the basement key. As if you try to explore around on this floor, you can't use the elevator and some other doors because either they're locked or the elevator's out of power, so we need to go downstairs and turn power on. Before we do anything, though, with the optional thing, we have to come into this kitchen and grab one of the plastic bottles over here to the side. Now, something I'm not sure about in the game is whether or not that plastic bottle and the thing you use it as count as separate items. The reason I say that is there is a max amount of items in this game. I think it's like 204, and then with the post-game optional items, you can get that to 204 plus like 3 or 4, maybe 5. And I forget how this works with this, but over here we have a glass vial lies shattered. It's not just broken, it looks smashed on purpose. We can use the plastic bottle on this red liquid to pick it up. The remaining liquid is emptied into the plastic bottle. Now what do we have here? This is completely optional, but in order to get the best ending of the game, you do need to grab that. So make sure you do if you're interested in that. Mind you, it's not like the best ending is the quote-unquote canon one. It's arguably the second best ending is the canon one, if not the... No, actually, no, it would be the second best ending. Silent Hill likes to play around with which ending's canon. In fact, I think Silent Hill 1 is the only one that has a de facto canon ending. Except for maybe Silent Hill 3, because the rest of the series is a lot more individual with that. The in-house generator powers elevators, ICUs, and all that. Do we want to press the switch? Yes, we do. By the way, down here in the basement, the only enemies you can really encounter at this point are the bugs. And you can easily outrun them just by sprinting. Harry does technically run out of breath from sprinting, but he never actively stops running. It's just a neat little animation that shows that you've been traveling a lot. Silent Hill 2 and 3, though, actively add an invisible stamina gauge. So, when you're playing those, you have to be a little more careful with how you're running around the town in the individual areas. But now we can access the 2 higher floors of the hospital, the 2nd and 3rd floor, so let's see what we got here. Oh, well, let's try the 3rd floor then. Now, I will say, I personally think in terms of a horror game atmospherically, the game tends to peak in the school and whenever you're generally out in the nighttime portion of the town. The hospital and even the final main area, I find, isn't as scary. But the 4th floor, this wasn't here a second ago. Well... it's not the first time we've seen some weird shit happen in this town. And suddenly things are looking a little more otherworldly. You don't really get a chance to explore much of the normal hospital. You're just sort of thrown right into the otherworld here. And the doors are locked behind you. I don't think you can ever go back to the 4th floor elevator rooms. With that now, we actively can explore the hospital as it's more or less meant to be explored. This is where we're going to be doing most of the meat. And once we enter this door, we are thrown, I think, right into our encounters with the first enemies? Yes. The 2 main enemies you're going to be encountering in the hospital are puppet nurses and puppet doctors. I want to come into this bathroom, by the way, to grab yourself the first of the main keys to this area, the plate of turtle. The puppet nurses and doctors... well, that was loud. Just sort of shamble at you and try to attack you. I think they can grab onto you, but they don't do damage to you while they're clinging onto you like the Grey Children / Mumblers do. So they're theoretically less threatening than the school's enemies, plus there's usually not as many of them in a room. There's sometimes upwards of 3, but because of the more crowded pathways they have to walk through, and you have to walk through, I find they're honestly easier to avoid. They're also a lot easier to combo stun, I find. VCR, it's old but usable. Ah, man, VCRs. I still have a lot of my VHSs. Some of them have gone by the wayside over the years, but I still have like some of the Pokemon ones when I was growing up, some of the Disney ones, of course, because almost everyone has some form of those from around my age group. We don't even have a VCR in the house anymore, I think, so by and large all my VHSs are just shelf pieces in a row. DVDs will never be that, though, because Blu-ray players will play those forever, so that collection always has its point. Huh, well, what do we got here on this wall? That obviously stands out. A steel plate is screwed to the wall. I'm sure we'll do something with that later on. That is something I like a lot. I briefly brought this up in one of the prior parts, I think. Silent Hill does a good job of placing its items and modeling the items in the environment so that if there's something you can pick up, it usually stands out in some regard. Either the camera will directly point you at it, or it'll be higher contrast to everything around it. Like a first aid pack is one of the few pure white things in this game. Usually the game's filled with a lot of like reds and gray tones. But even like, say, in one of the rooms we've been in already, we didn't really get to see because I'm holding the L2 button basically at all times to focus the camera more on Harry so I can navigate easier. They'll point the default camera usually right at something you can grab. And in the case they don't do that, they still do a good job making it stand out from things you can't pick up. Actually, a good example is right here. This blood pack right here. It doesn't look like anything else on the shelves in the way of it's textured a little bit differently, so you can usually tell you can pick it up. To compare that to Resident Evil, at least Resident Evil at this point in time, usually if there was an item you could pick up, it stood out because either it had a shining glint on it, or it was a 3D model surrounded by 2D objects on a pre-rendered background. Code Veronica onwards changed that a little bit just because of the full 3D nature moving forward, but then they went back to the pre-rendered backgrounds for 0 and 1 remake, and they did a good job of making things stand out there as well, but that was usually because they added a little glint to items moving forward. There's a lot of parallels you can draw between the two and how they tend to handle things completely differently, but still end up at a very same satisfying conclusion. And there's actually an example of the camera right there. By default, the camera in this room points you at I think this is the plate of cat right here? Is that the second or the third one of those that we grabbed? I completely lost track because of the topics I've been going off on. I know I have one topic I want to talk about, but I'm going to save that for the final area because that's where I feel it's best represented. And yeah, right there you can see the bubble nurses grabbing onto me. Or not the bubble nurses, the puppet nurses. Bubble nurses are Silent Hill 2. Their grabs don't do anything because they're meant to really swarm you, but as you can see with that room in particular, there's a lot of very thin side passageways that you're locked to. They can only really approach you from both directions in order to hit you there. So in some ways, the nurses are as harmed by their own ineffective attack pattern as they are the layout of the area around them. I find the hospital in general, some occasional unnerving atmosphere sounds notwithstanding, to be a lot less intimidating an area to explore, even on a first playthrough, than the school. That also could be a factor of you're more used to what the game will throw at you at that point, but honestly, the nurses are at their most annoying when there's an item in a room you have to get past one of them to grab. Other than this, though, they have a good bit of health. I think they have more than the Grey Children. But a good kick will always do it. And here we get a Resident Evil classic, the lighter. However, we cannot use this lighter to give ourselves extra light. Although, now I think about it, Harry had one of those at the start, so where the hell did it go? We need to use that as a particular key later on. Now, something I forgot to mention at the start of the game. Silent Hill, like Resident Evil, has novelizations, but unlike Resident Evil, where I believe those were written by a Western author, the Silent Hill novelizations never really left Japan, I think, and oh, those are eerie tentacles. If you get too close to them, I believe they attack you, but as you might notice, they're attacking some blood on the floor. So let's get a little bit closer to them. And use the blood pack. I don't know why I backed off there, maybe I thought I was too close already. Let's see what this does. Alright, so now we can come over here and get our third plate, the plate of Hatter. Can you guess what these items are themed after? Because you're probably correct. They do actively theme a lot of the key items you get throughout the game, like the keys we needed to access the pathway to the school are all based off Alice in Wonderland, or not Alice in Wonderland, Wizard of Oz. These are based off Alice in Wonderland. I like it when games do that for their key items. Also, something I should note, the inventory in Silent Hill 1's a little weird. It's infinite, of course, like I mentioned before, but the way items get placed in it is a little weird, where ammo is usually separated from the weapon it's attached to in some regard. They tend to put weapons together, sort of, But after that, it's more or less the order you pick things up in, and that means getting to specific items might be a moment of goes left for a few spaces, can't find it, goes right all the way, finds it. The menu navigation does get a little bit better in Silent Hill 2, if only because it's also a faster menu because all the items are 2D objects in the menu rather than 3D rotating models. And Silent Hill 3, I think, just adds somewhat subcategories that you can go around to more easily. That's, I think, our first puppet doctor. The puppet enemies really are just, I think, slower to attack you as well compared to the Grey Children. Partially intentionally so, I think, but that's more of a plot, lore, background reason that we won't talk about yet. And here we got our final plate, the Plate of Queen, so we can now use those to open the door. They do open. We gotta find that first, though. And if I recall correctly, that is on the 2nd floor, because we're back on the 1st floor now. Harry, health-wise, not only in terms of the health items, but in terms of general, like, health amount, I find is hardier than your usual Resident Evil protagonist, but I can't tell if that's just because he has straight up more health or if enemies do more damage comparatively in Resi. But like in Resident Evil, you can only tell your health based off your pause screen. Unlike Resident Evil 2 and 3, even onwards, there's not really a limping animation when you're low on health in Silent Hill 1. 2 and 3, I think, have a little bit of one in some regard. Not so much here. You can only tell based off the color of the background behind Harry's portrait on the pause screen. And here we have a locked door. There are 4 square indentations on the door. I bet you can tell what we have to do here, but first read this little thing over here. Clouds flowing over a hill. Sky on a sunny day. Tangerines that are bitter. Lucky 4-leaf clover. Violets in the garden. Dandelions along a path. Unavoidable sleeping time. Liquid flowing from a slashed wrist. That is your hint for where you need to place each of the 4 plates we've gotten through our exploration in the hospital thus far in this set of total 8 plates. You need to follow the color order they just gave you. So, for instance, we see on the top is white, and they brought up the second thing in that list was a sky on a sunny day, so we can place the blue plate here between the white and the orange. From there, it's just a process of elimination to figure out what you need to do. So the next one after that would be green, because it goes between the orange and the purple. From there, I believe, is yellow, because that represents the dandelions. And then the blood from the slashed list, that was the last thing on that list, is the red plate. Later Silent Hills would do things a little bit differently with their puzzles in that there was an active puzzle difficulty option that changed how puzzles were either set up, made the puzzle hints more obvious or more difficult to decipher, depending on... And in some cases even randomized the puzzle, so you had to actively, like, figure out from the hint they gave you and what's randomly put into the puzzle to figure out what you had to do. And the way I'm going to tackle later Silent Hills probably is I'm probably going to play them on normal, just so I give the most, like, here's the balanced what I'd recommend first-timers do sort of experience, as I don't like it when puzzles like that get as randomized as some of the later ones do. I'm particularly thinking of the, what was the name of the puzzle in Silent Hill 2? I think it's the Guilty Man puzzle or something like that. The one where you have to determine who's guilty based off, like, 3 or 4 different testimony. And that being randomized in that game, just, I don't like that kind of stuff. I'm fine with liar puzzles normally, as usually, like, it's a relatively, like, consistent look for the odd man out, look for who makes someone else lie by figuring out if they're lying or not. Not so much in that game, but that's a different topic. Right now, we have some disinfecting alcohol. Now, when I first played the game, I thought that was a healing item. It's not. It's a key item that we need to use elsewhere. I don't know why. The sounds the puppet nurses make are funny to me in that they remind me a bit of Resident Evil, but in particular, they remind me of the dying groans your characters make in Resident Evil. I'm especially thinking of Claire's in Code Veronica for some reason. And it's partially because their audio quality is just the worst in the game to me. By and large, I'd say this game's voice acting is about as good as Resident Evil 2, where there's still some ham, and some very flat deliveries, but it's not like B-movie, don't open that door from Resident Evil 1. There is a lot less voice acting in this game. Maybe not, actually. I think there's less instances of voice acting, but the active cutscenes where they do talk go on a lot longer. Like the one we had with the mysterious lady at the church last part, that was like 2-3 minutes long, I think, whereas the average Resident Evil talking cutscene, at least on the PlayStation, is maybe in a minute and a half long at most until you get closer to endgame. The morgue here sucks because they actively throw two puppet nurses at you from both sides, and picking up the items on these beds is a little bit specific. There is some PS1 jank in this game, and here's another ampule, by the way. But I do think compared to Resident Evil 1, there's less jank in the way here, if only because you're a lot more restrained on where you can go. And here we have another storage room, which has some ammo that we can grab, which is always going to be handy. Again, if you haven't figured it out by this point, they've already given us more than enough handgun ammo. You can easily take out a lot of the nurses with just that. And they're even giving you a good amount of shotgun ammo by this point. But you might notice there's a giant red shelf over there that kind of stands out. There are skid marks from the cabinet being moved. I think you can figure out what we have to do here. Resident Evil's done this since the first game. Do you want to push the cabinet? Yes, we do. That is something I feel that's a little bit lacking in Silent Hill compared to Resident Evil. There's not as much environment interactivity when it comes to, like, just actively pushing things. You can usually only investigate something from one angle and then interact with it like that. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 6, we're going to continue on to the Alchemilla Hospital, hopefully finding a way out of it in the process. See you guys then.